A massive shout out to the Genin tier member of this channel. Thank you Aliyah Rav, your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, as well as receiving special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. There's a rumor going around. If you like this video and subscribe, you will be reborn in Clover Kingdom. If you become a member, you will receive a 5-leaf grimoire. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Naruto Had the Most Powerful Ice Zanpakuto Hyorinmaru. I hope you enjoy. Naruto rubbed his aching head as he came to, climbing to his feet shakily. What? The memory came back in a flash, distorted by a distinct crimson haze. The grass shinobi mused quietly, Naruto in her grasp. It seems the Kyubi brat is still alive. Oh. The ninja looked amused as she studied the intricate seal on the boy's stomach. When you use the beast's chakra, the seal becomes visible. The Kusugakure Kunoichi moved her right hand behind herself, a mini purple fire lighting up on each fingertip. Naruto thrashed in her grasp, trying desperately to free himself. The ninja's amazingly long tongue, however, would not relinquish him from its grasp. Hey! He shouted, wriggling as much as the foreign appendage would allow. Let me go. The super powerful grass ninja, who was actually Orochimaru in disguise, thrust his flaming fingers into Naruto's unprotected abdomen, crying, Gogyo Fuin. Naruto's face contorted into a silent scream as the hubby Sennin's agile digits dug into his stomach, clenching around the soft flesh. The red bled from his irises as the Kyubi's chakra disappeared, returning his eyes to their natural blue. His canine teeth shrunk to their original size and his nails were once more blunt and soft. Then, without warning, the blonde boy slumped, unconscious. He groaned softly. What did that snake freak do to me? He looked around, his expression dazed. Where? Frozen tundra is what he saw, with snowy banks that stretched for miles, far beyond his human line of sight. Several trees, barren of any sign of life and covered by a thick layer of ice, littered the rolling slopes. Something soft and small landed on his nose, quickly melting into water as it dribbled down his face. He reached out, catching petite, white fuzz in his palm. It was snowing, he realized, though with the blankets of the stuff that covered the ground, it was difficult to distinguish the tiny flakes falling from the sky. The slate-gray clouds didn't make it any easier, either, as they blocked out the sun and left only a minuscule bit of light for him to see with. Despite the abominable weather, however, he didn't feel cold at all. His eyes widened, surprise and confusion in their sapphire depths. Where am I? Last he remembered, he'd been in the Forest of Death during the second part of the Chunin selection exams and he had fought against an impossibly strong Kusugakure ninja. He had been surrounded by trees and roots, each of which was easily 3 times the size of normal foliage. So where was he now? The only place that had snow, according to what he'd been taught, was the frigid Yuki no Kuni, the land of snow. Even Yuki no Kuni, however, had never been reported to have trees covered in ice. If he wasn't in the land of snow, one of the only places that suffered through winter, then where could he be? On this plain of never-ending ice and snow, the blonde thought in a rare philosophical moment, did I die? So, a deep voice, like the rolling thunder, spoke. Nearly jumping out of his skin, Naruto turned at near light speed, coming face to face with a huge blue dragon. You're finally here. Its scales were smooth and slick and reflected the minuscule light perfectly, which gave them an ice-like shine. Atop its head was a crown of spikes, each of which jutted backwards like shards of broken glass. Its nostrils were thin and narrow, almost serpentine, but its breath did not leave clouds of condensation behind. Tell me, can you hear my name? The dragon moved closer, its glowing red eyes boring into his own. Can you call out to me, to Hyorinmaru? Is that you? Naruto asked, voice low and quavering with fear and awe. His eyes were wide and his breathing came out in shaky rasps. His heart thumped loudly. Are you Hyorinmaru? The dragon seemed to grin, bearing 2 rows of shiny, carnivorous teeth. So, you can hear. A burst of warm breath came from its nostrils. After years of having your ears plugged by the 9-tailed fox, you can finally hear me. The fox, Naruto parroted, his features quickly contorting into rage. What does he have to do with anything? Do not be so quick to hate, child. A second burst of breath came, knocking Naruto off his feet. He fell on his butt with a soft grunt. If it were not for that beast, you would likely have failed to survive your rough childhood. Blocked me from you, he may have, but kept you alive. He did, even if it was in self-interest. What? Naruto looked shocked. But how? He protected you when I could not, the dragon responded. He healed you when others would have waned away into nothing. He soothed you when sleep would not come to your young mind. But that was all his fault to begin with. Naruto protested loudly. If he hadn't attacked Konoha, then he wouldn't have gotten his fuzzy butt sealed, and I would have had a normal life. Do not be so quick to judge, Hyorinmaru purred. The fault of the Nine Tails attack lies in the Uchiha and their accursed bloodline. The one called Madara. The dragon's eyes flashed. Were it not for that evil man, the beast would not be where he is. Naruto looked confused. What does the Uchiha clan? That, I cannot answer, the serpentine beast interrupted, anticipating his question. I only know what information I can glean from the beast and his mutterings. Oh, Naruto said lamely. He glanced around, somewhat unnerved by the dragon's unblinking stare. So, what are you? There was huff from the creature in front of him, almost like an amused chuckle, but Naruto dared not imagine he was right. Despite this, the dragon's tone was serious when it responded, I am the piece of your soul dedicated to fighting. I am the part of you that never gives up, even when your body is frail and defeated. There was something powerful in the beast's voice as it continued, its pitch rising, I am the wrath of heaven, the instrument with which you slay your foes. I am the lord of ice and snow, the master of all things water. I am the frigid bite of death. I am your sword and your shield, and I shall protect you until the bitter end. Its voice rose to a roar, I am Hyôrinmaru. It bowed its head submissively, startling Naruto with the foreign gesture, now command me, and raise your enemies to the ground. A sudden feeling of power rushed through his body, and he felt like he could do anything, beat anyone, and overcome any obstacle. It was like molten lava flowing through his veins, and with nothing but confidence, he reached out to touch the spiked crown of Hyorinmaru's head. The strange world disappeared in a flash of bright light. Naruto woke with a gasp, his head aching and his stomach sore. It felt as though he'd been run through with a katana, as though the metal had pierced the flesh of his belly and been left there to bleed him out. Ha! There was a loud thud, as of meat hitting the ground. Sakura's voice cried out in a soft shout, a vicious crack renting the air, a crack like that of bones breaking, shattered by the blunt force of the unforgiving earth. Naruto's mind was hazy, as though clouded by a thick fog he had no way of escaping. What's that noise? Kin, out of the way, the words were thick and seemed shrouded in a heavy mist. A blast of wind leapt to life, sprinkling his body with a cool breeze. There were 3 sharp clunks and a soft explosion sound, one that Naruto recognized as belonging to a kawarimi. It's so noisy. God, my head is pounding. His skull pulsed with pain, as if someone had drilled several holes in his head. He let out a soft hiss through his teeth. Useless. Another rush of wind, this time closer than before, showered him with harsh air that whipped his skin raw. His ears twitched at the dark scoff that followed. Shut up, you're so annoying, you're not fooling anyone. 3 more thunks, followed once more by the soft explosion of the body replacement technique. Naruto's brow furrowed in annoyance, his lips twisted into a scowl. Shut up, one more time, and all, get serious. Another thud, this time heavier, followed by a surprised gasp and the smell of blood leaking from fresh wounds. There was a muffled cry of pain, feminine in nature, and several loud whacks as someone hit something repeatedly. Then, a thud as something or someone was thrown bodily to the ground. That's it, someone's gonna die. Blue eyes snapped open, a harsh voice whispering, no more Mr. Nice Guy. He stood in one fluid motion, fingers wrapping around the hilt of a sword that he'd never had before, but one that sent a satisfied rush through his veins. The world halted before his frigid gaze, his sapphire eyes sweeping the forest around him, narrowed in cold fury he'd never felt before. His grasp on his sword tightened. Naru, too, Sakura whispered dully from her spot on the ground, one eye already swelling shut. She looked surprised to see him, like he was some phantom specter back from the dead. What the? The ninja with spiky black hair asked confusedly. Weren't you out cold a few seconds ago? Naruto focused his icy gaze on the sound genin, words tumbling past his lips before he knew what he was saying. Sôten ni zase, Hyôrinmaru. Sit upon the frozen heavens, ice ring. Everyone waited for something to happen, but nothing did, and the spiky-haired genin smirked, a cocky gleam in his eye. He scoffed, was something supposed to happen? Zaku, the bandaged one scolded, wary of this new opponent. This was not the Uzumaki Naruto they had been told to expect. In a blur, Naruto had moved to stand in front of the one identified as Zaku, already in mid-swing. Startled, Zaku stumbled backwards in a clumsy effort to dodge. Steel glinted and several locks of black hair fell to the ground as the sound genin landed on his butt. Zaku, shocked at the pure speed of his enemy, could only stare. Instantly, Naruto was upon him again, both hands grasping the hilt as his blade came down in a graceful arc. Zaku yelped, rolling backward over his shoulder only to land straight on his feet, crouched defensively. He looked like a frightened animal too scared to move. As Naruto moved to continue his assault, Zaku channeled chakra into his legs and leapt as far away as his enhanced limbs would allow, preparing his own attack as he went. Air compressed, chakra funneled, and Zaku aimed, Zankuaha. A gale of tightly packed wind rushed from Zaku's palms, targeting the motionless Naruto, whose icy gaze had not wavered. Zaku grinned, knowing that there was no way the blonde boy could dodge at this range. Naruto jumped. It wasn't a small jump, like a hop, but a full-blown leap that carried him at least 24 feet into the air, where gravity seemed to lose its hold on him as he once more swung his sword. Zaku nearly palmed his face, wondering what kind of idiot swung at nothing during a life-or-death battle. From the downward arc of the blade, a winding, icy blue Japanese dragon sword, its eyes red and its jaw wide. It was headed straight for him and he was too surprised to even think of dodging. It was like something had frozen him to his spot and no matter how much he told himself to move, he couldn't. Zaku. At the last second, Dosu called out his name and Zaku finally responded, vaulting from his spot as the sapphire beast closed in on him. He felt a frigid chill nick his left arm, but paid it no attention. A gasp from his female teammate caught his attention and he looked back to where he'd previously been standing, his eyes widening. Behind him, there was a patch of ice easily a meter in diameter. The grass formed into tiny rigid spikes that he could tell would pierce straight through his sandals. He moved his arms in an effort to push himself up, but his left one was heavy and cumbersome. He glanced down and couldn't help the gasp of air that left his lungs, a horrified glint in his eyes. His left arm, from the elbow down, was covered in a thick block of ice. A soft thump announced Naruto landing next to him and Zaku channeled more chakra, flinging out his good arm, Zankuaha. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto deflected the attack with his sword, despite how impossible such an act was. Eyebrow twitching, he spun on his heel, blocking the attack from Zaku's male teammate, Dosu. Metal clashed and sparks flew, Dosu's gauntlet pushing against Hyorinmaru. Ice crept from the point of contact, slowly consuming Dosu's arm in a heavy layer of crystallized water. Surprised, Dosu tried to get away, but Naruto's left hand sneaked out and locked his elbow in a grasp as strong as steel. He wriggled, but Naruto's grip was firm and unwavering. Once the gauntlet was completely frozen over, Naruto let go of Dosu and brought his sword up as his enemy stumbled. With all of his strength, he slammed the butt of his sword's hilt into the metal glove, smashing it to pieces mercilessly. Dosu yelled as he fell backwards, clutching at his severely injured right arm. Several scratches decorated the lacerated skin and the bone felt like it had broken at the point of impact. Spikes of pain lanced up and down the entirety of his arm, his pulse pounding against the flesh. "Leave your scroll and go." Dosu's head jerked up at the icy intonation, his mind taking forever to process what his ears were telling him. After all of this, the broken arm and gauntlet, Zaku's frozen limb, and a show of power so unreal that he felt as though he was dreaming, this boy was letting them leave. "Leave your scroll and go," Naruto repeated coldly, his eyes more frigid than Yuki no Kuni. Dosu could only nod dumbly. With his good arm, he reached into his kunai pouch and pulled out a scroll decorated with the kanji for earth. Setting it down slowly, he motioned to his teammates silently. They left without another word. As soon as the team of sound genin had vanished, Naruto picked up the scroll, turning to show it off. He grinned, displaying it proudly. "Look, Sakura-san. I got us a scroll." Sakura blinked, absent-mindedly wondering what had happened to Sakura-chan, then nodded slowly. Questions zipped through her head at blinding speeds, leaving her to wonder just what she had witnessed not more than a minute before. That sword, where had Naruto gotten it? She took a closer look at it. The hilt was wrapped in azure cloth and the cap at the bottom appeared to be made of some sort of bronze, or perhaps even gold. The handguard just beneath the blade was made in the design of a four-pointed star, also appearing to be composed of gold. The blade itself was an oddity as well. The metal gleamed with a soft silver glint that belied its true purpose, and the steel appeared to be as smooth as glass. Unlike the standard ninja sword, like a kodachi or a ninjutsu, the blade had majestic curve to it and was quite long. It seemed to be the size of an ordinary katana, which was a big sword for someone of Naruto's stature. She shivered. The edge was what grabbed her attention the most. She knew, without even testing it, that the blade's edge was sharp enough to cut through most targets. She almost wanted to see if it could slice a shuriken in half, just to get a more accurate judge of its abilities. Abilities. That's the word. Even more unusual than the weapon's composition was the abilities it had revealed. She wondered if it was the actual sword or if Naruto was simply channeling jutsu through it. After all, what blade can fire a dragon of ice at the wielder's opponent? What sword can freeze an enemy simply by contact? Sakura jerked at the sound of scraping metal, looking over at her blonde teammate. A navy blue sheath was slung over his right shoulder, tied there by a strand of iron ninja wire, and he was easing his sword into it delicately. He grinned at her and she could only smile awkwardly. That just brought up more questions. Where had the sheath come from? Naruto hadn't been carrying it with him when the exam had started. He hadn't been carrying the sword, either. He didn't know anything about sealing weapons. So what did that leave? Where had the sword and sheath come from? The whole thing was giving her a headache. Hey, Naruto looked over as a girl jumped down from the trees, her brown hair tied up in two buns on the top of her head. Her white-eyed teammate frowned. That's a nice sword you have. Yeah, Naruto chuckled. He's great, ain't he? I'll say. She whistled. The hilt is amazing in and of itself, but the blade. I've never seen something of this quality before. She giggled. So, yeah, Naruto grinned. His name's Hyorinmaru. He's the best sword you'll ever see. I can see that. She too grinned, and his owner isn't anything to sneeze at either. I've seen quite a few blades, but this one is something else. I didn't know it was possible to channel jutsu through weapons like that. Even the White Fang's sword couldn't manage something so advanced. She let her eyes rove over the hilt, taking in its splendor. So, did your Jonin-sensei teach you that? Naruto blinked, cocking his head to the side. Teach me what? She resisted the urge to arch an eyebrow. You know, that dragon thing. He looked her oddly. She motioned with her arms as if swinging a sword, saying, where you just swing and this dragon comes out and attacks your enemies. Oh, that. Recognition lit up in Naruto's eyes. That's Hyorinmaru. But, I thought Hyorinmaru was the sword, she stated lamely, confusedly. He's both, Naruto told her matter-of-factly. He's the dragon and the sword. But, that means, she started, scrunching her face up as she put together the implications that statement brought. If this Hyorinmaru was both the sword and the dragon, that meant that, you have a dragon sealed inside of that sword. Something like that, Naruto admitted sheepishly. Truth be told, he wasn't sure himself. All he knew was that Hyorinmaru was both his sword and the dragon, and so long as that didn't interfere with anything, he was going to leave well enough alone. As long as it worked, he didn't care about the how. She opened her mouth and closed it several times, but nothing came out. Finally, she decided upon an excited grin, giggling girlishly. She turned to leave, throwing a wave over her shoulder. You're an interesting guy. So let's meet again, Naruto-san. Don't lose, okay. Leaping into the trees, she and her team disappeared into the dense foliage. Naruto couldn't help the grin that threatened to split his face. That girl was quite an interesting one. She was kind of strange, he had to admit, because it wasn't every day you found a girl so obsessed with weapons. He didn't really care, though, because she was interested in him as a person and that made her okay in his book. That teammate of hers, though, Neji, was someone that Naruto figured he better watch out for. Lee had told him that Neji was the strongest genin in the entire village of Konoha, and Lee himself had easily beaten Naruto. If Neji was even stronger than Lee, that meant that Naruto would definitely have to keep an eye on the taijutsu prodigy, Hyuga Neji. His thoughts were interrupted by Sakura's excited cry of, Sasuke-kun. I say we open the scrolls, Naruto said, injecting his opinion. After roughly 3 hours of non-stop running, Team 7 had finally made it to the tower, where they promptly got into a fight about what to do. Idiot. Sakura punched Naruto over the head, a vein popping out on her brow. Anko-san said not to open the scrolls. We'd get disqualified. She was talking about before we got to the tower. Naruto shouted back, rubbing the bump forming on his cranium. Besides, we would probably still be looking for a second scroll if I hadn't tricked the snake freak into burning a decoy. I don't care, Sakura fumed, glaring at him. I'm not about to let you and your stupidity get Sasuke-kun disqualified from the Chunin exams. It's logic, Naruto argued, blue eyes burning. We're in the tower with no one to greet us. The only explanation is that the scrolls have something to do with our qualification into the next part of the exams. Since when do you know anything about logic? Sakura demanded rhetorically. I'm not going to let you take any chances. This is one of the most important milestones in Sasuke-kun's life. You're not going to mess that up. Geez. Naruto flung his hands up in exasperation, rolling his eyes. For the smartest girl in the academy, you sure are pretty dumb. What did you say? Sakura's voice rose. I dare you to say that to my face. I said. Naruto yelled back, you, dumb. Come here, you little. Sakura reached for his neck, fingers twitching dangerously. Hey, guys, both of them froze as Sasuke looked at them with his serious face. Naruto thought it made him look constipated. I think we should open the scrolls. Naruto palmed his face as Sakura squealed and crooned about how right her Sasuke-kun was, and about how he always had the best ideas. Even after the mess with the three-sound ninja, she still found it prudent to be Sasuke's little cheerleader. He muttered to himself. Why did I even like her, anyway? Come on, Baka. Sakura pulled him by the sleeve of his jacket, shoving the heaven scroll into his stomach forcefully. Help me open the scrolls. Grudgingly peeling open the scroll given to him, he stared at its contents. Several characters were written down, focused around single kanji in the center. Naruto blinked, Jin. As soon as the word left his lips, the scrolls began to smoke and sizzle in their hands. Naruto nearly dropped it as Sasuke spoke again, his tone urgent, Naruto, Sakura, throw the scrolls away. Trusting the Uchiha to know what he was talking about, his teammates hurled the scrolls at the floor several feet away, watching as the smoke rose to an apex and exploded outwards. As the smoke began to clear, however, a shape could be seen within the dispersing cloud. Team 7 tensed, prepared to fight whatever had appeared from their scrolls. Naruto blinked in surprise, then grinned, Iruka-sensei. True enough, the smog dissipated, revealing their trusted academy teacher, Yumino Iruka. He grinned at them, waving in a friendly gesture, hey, guys. It's been a while, huh? Sakura stared, confused, Iruka-sensei, what just happened? Oh, well, Iruka rubbed the back of his neck, the summoning spell on the scrolls was designed to let us Chunin greet the applicants at the end of the second exam. It's just luck that I was the one who wound up meeting you three. Congratulations, you all passed the second exam. If we had sneaked a peek at the scrolls before the exam was over, Sasuke started, what would you have done, Iruka-sensei? Iruka scratched his temple with his index finger, sharp as ever, Sasuke. He shrugged, our orders were very specific. Anyone who opened a scroll too soon was to be knocked out until the end of the second exam. His expression softened, listen, about the third exam, don't overdo things, okay? The three genin looked at him, blinking in surprise. He continued, I mean it. I worry about you guys. Especially you, Naruto. Don't worry about me, Iruka-sensei, Naruto grinned, fingering the hilt of his sword. Belatedly, Iruka realized he'd had it the entire time they'd been talking. No one in this exam is a match for Hyorinmaru. Iruka's eyes widened as, for a second, a translucent blue dragon appeared, hovering protectively over Naruto's shoulder. Its serpentine body and tail were coiled around the boy's feet and its red eyes were menacing. It bared its sharp teeth in a vicious snarl. Then, an instant later, it was gone and he seemed to be the only one who'd seen it. He grinned, rubbing his neck sheepishly, yeah, I guess so, huh? The Hokage looked over the assembled genin, resisting the overwhelming compulsion to smile when he saw Naruto among them. 21 had made it, the majority of them from his own village. 9 of them were rookies and another 3 were a team that was only about a year old, having graduated the year previous. It did his heart good to see such strength and courage in one so young. In the front of the room stood a group consisting of Chunin, Jonin, and the Hokage. Protruding from the front wall was a pair of stone hands forming the seal for Ram. Enko smirked at them from where she stood, congratulations on passing. Hokage-sama will now explain the third test, so listen carefully. The Sandaime took a step forward. Before we begin, there is something I'd like you to know. He tugged his hat down slightly, bearing the kanji for fire imprinted upon its center. Why do we have all the alliance countries taking this exam together? To promote friendship amongst the countries, to raise the level of shinobi. I don't want you to be confused about the true meaning. This exam is a replacement for war among the allied countries. Sandaime's face was impassive as he took a puff on his pipe. If you go back in time, the current allies were enemies who fought each other over who would rule. In order to prevent wasteful fighting, the stage that those countries chose for fighting, that is the origin of the Chunin Exams. What do you mean? Tenten asked confusedly. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Inuzuka Kiba shouted. I thought the point was to select Chunin. Sarutobi continued, undaunted by the questions thrown at him. It is true that this exam decides who is to become Chunin, but it is also an opportunity for the different countries to show off their ninja to the important figures who watch this third exam. A shinobi village is only as strong as its weakest link. Whatever, the red-headed Gaara muttered darkly. Could you wrap up this philosophical talk and get down to the life and death stuff anytime soon? HMPH. If you insist. He paused for a second, on to the third exam. Actually, a sick-looking Jonin appeared in front of the Hokage, as referee. Hokage-sama, if I may. Sandaime nodded, a small smile on his face. By all means. The Jonin turned toward the genin, revealing his weary face and the dark bags under his eyes. I am Gekko Hayate and I am the referee. Before the third test, I'm afraid we'll have to hold a preliminary. Since we are going to begin right away, I must ask any who wish to quit to do so now. Preliminary, Kiba echoed. Right now, well, Gekko coughed. It's not as if the first two tests weren't challenging enough. On the contrary, they were quite difficult. We still have too many applicants, however, and, like Hokage-sama said, there will be plenty of nobles watching. What does that have to do with anything? Kiba retorted. Gekko coughed again. The nobles will be traveling from all over to see the third exam, so the exam itself has to be quick and speedy to maintain viewer interest. To do that, we need to cut down the number of applicants with this preliminary round. As I said earlier, any who wish to quit may do so now without adversely affecting your teammates' chances of success. Well, Yukushi Kabuto raised his hand. I'm out of here. What? Naruto demanded sharply. Kabuto-senpai, why are you quitting? I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, Kabuto sighed, but I got the crap beat out of me in the second exam. And ever since that little fight I got into with those sound ninja right before the first exam, I've been totally deaf in my left ear. Kabuto shook his head. Now they're saying this could be a fight to the death. I'm just not up to that. Questioning stares followed his retreating back as he left, sparing a short, unnoticeable glance at Naruto and Sasuke. Hayate looked around. Right then, cough, cough. If no one else wishes to forfeit, let's begin the preliminary rounds. If you'll turn your attention to the screen behind me. Everyone turned his or her gazes to the large screen behind the sickly Jonin, watching as the blackness faded into a dark gray. The letters, verses, lit up in the very center. Above them was the name, Uchiha Sasuke, and below it was, Akado Yoroi. Now, Hayate said, if these two participants would come to the front. Sasuke grinned as he and Yoroi moved towards the examiner, each confident of their own ability. Gekko Hayate made a motion towards the stands. Now if everyone else would please leave the arena. When everyone had left the area for the stands, he said, please begin. Yoroi made a hand seal, teasing, are you ready, Sasuke-kun? He slipped his left hand into his kunai pouch, his right hovering in front of his stomach. He withdrew a few shuriken, while, simultaneously, Sasuke withdrew a kunai from the holster on his thigh. Without warning, Yoroi flung his shuriken at Sasuke, who knocked them away with a swipe of his kunai. A flash of inexplicable weakness brought Sasuke to the ground, kunai still in hand. Yoroi took the opportunity to try and attack Sasuke, trying to bring his hand down on Sasuke's head. Sasuke rolled and dodged, watching the other genin's hand sink into the tile floor. Plunging his kunai into ground as a break, Sasuke spun around and brought Yoroi's legs from under him, pulling the older genin into a painful-looking arm lock. Yoroi's hand grabbed Sasuke's shirt firmly and, suddenly, Sasuke felt himself growing weaker. Too weak to prevent it, Sasuke could only watch as Yoroi twisted himself free of Sasuke's grip and brought his hand down on the Uchiha's chest. Hard. Jerking up, Yoroi spun around and latched that same hand on Sasuke's head, sapping the younger boy's strength. "You're stealing my chakra," Sasuke gasped weakly. Yoroi chuckled darkly, an evil grin hidden beneath the cloth on his face. "So you finally noticed." With a sudden surge of strength, Sasuke kicked him off, standing up as fast as he could. A scowl lit up his face as he tried to reason out the cause of the unexplained weakness, but no answer would come. Was it the curse mark? But wouldn't he feel something from it if that was what was bothering him? Yoroi growled as he stood back up. He rushed Sasuke again, his technique charged and ready to go. With a burst of speed, Sasuke ducked under his attempt at grappling and sent a kick into the boy's chin, forcing the genin into the air. As fast as his body would allow, Sasuke followed him, appearing beneath Yoroi's airborne body. Sasuke sent a light poke to his opponent's back. "It's over." Using the other genin's spine, Sasuke flipped over his enemy's body, kicking towards his stomach. It was blocked and Sasuke used the teen's arm as a springboard, landing a vicious backhand in his face. Still twisting, he fired a punch into Yoroi's stomach, knocking the air from his body. Now only a few feet above the ground, Sasuke used his momentum to bring a solid kick into Yoroi's body, forcing him to collide painfully with the ground and Sasuke's foot at the same time. "Shishi Renden," Sasuke said. With his opponent unconscious and his fight won, Sasuke collapsed on his butt, panting heavily. Hayate bent over Yoroi, checking for signs of unconsciousness. When he found his answer, he shouted to the stadium, "Akado Yoroi is unable to continue. Uchiha Sasuke wins the first round." As Kakashi took Sasuke from the stadium and medics took away Yoroi, the screen lit up with the next combatants, Zaku Abumi vs Aburame Shino. Zaku smirked, confident of his victory, his left arm thawed. "Who's this loser?" When both had entered the stadium and stood in front of Hayate, the referee said, "We will now begin the second match." The remaining genin watched the match unfold, wincing a bit as Shino got hit by Zaku's Zanpakuto. Hinata was worried about him. Will Shino-kun be alright? Kiba, her other teammate, smirked. "I wouldn't worry about Shino. He's one of the guys even I don't want to fight." Neji gazed lazily at the fight, disinterest in his pale gaze. "For a rookie, this guy isn't so bad. But can he win this?" Tenten grimaced when Zaku's arms were damaged, severely hindering their movement. "It seems he can and did." Down in the stadium, Hayate shouted, "Winner, Aburame Shino." The screen lit up again as Zaku was carried away on a stretcher, Tsurugi Masumi vs Kankuro. Kankuro bested his opponent relatively quickly. Tsurugi had attacked and supposedly broke his neck, only to discover that he was attacking a puppet. Kankuro had pulled himself from the mass of bandages on the floor, revealing that he was safe and unharmed. With practiced ease, Kankuro crushed his opponent, almost literally. In less than a minute after it started, Hayate said, "Winner, Kankuro." Ino and Sakura's match ended in an anticlimactic draw. They were too evenly matched to take the other down, so they finished with a double knockout. The screen lit up for the fifth time, reading, Temari vs Tenten. This turned out to be the worst matchup for Tenten. Her weapons couldn't reach her opponent at all and she was defeated easily. Temari had beaten her brutally, as evidenced by the fact that she had caught the weapons mistress on her fan, Tenten's back bent at an unhealthy angle. Lee had gotten angry and was ready to fight, but Guy held him back. Lee, still angry, nodded and relinquished his fighting pose. For now. Nara Shikamaru vs Kin Tsuchi, a girl? Shikamaru asked, as if looking for confirmation. He sighed, Mendokusai. Their match didn't last very long either. Kin had had Shikamaru caught in her trap for a few moments, but Shikamaru had come back and outdone her. Using his Kajimane no Jutsu, he forced her to hit her head against the wall. She knocked herself unconscious and Shikamaru was declared the winner. After Kin was carried away on a stretcher, the screen flashed again, revealing the combatants of the next fight, Uzumaki Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba. "Ha, we got lucky, Akamaru," Kiba gloated, jumping down into the arena. Akamaru, his dog, gave an enthusiastic bark of agreement. Excited to finally have his match, Naruto flung himself over the railing, landing on the tiled floor with surprising ease. There was a huge grin on his face, one that was easily matched by his opponent. Hayate stood between them. "Hey," Kiba clenched his fist. "I feel bad for you, so I'll end this in one punch." "Yeah right, dog breath." Naruto shot back. "Why don't you and your master go back to chasing cats?" Orochimaru isn't my master, Kiba shouted vehemently, glaring. He's my partner. Prove it, Naruto called coolly. Kiba growled. The 7th match, Uzumaki Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba, Hayate said calmly. Begin. Kiba's hands instantly clasped together in a hand seal, Ninpo, Shikyaku no Jutsu. Ninja arts. 4-legged technique. The Inuzuka heir got down on all fours, his body becoming more feral and animalistic in appearance. His canines lengthened into fangs and his fingernails into claws, sharp and pointed. Without warning, he dashed for his opponent, intent on winning with a single attack. Naruto, too surprised to do anything, was hit solidly in the stomach. He collided painfully with the stadium wall, crumbling a small portion of it. It's over, Hayate-san, Kiba said confidently, a smirk on his lips. He won't be getting up. Up in the stands, Yuhi Kurenai, Kiba's teacher, smirked over at Hatake Kakashi. Looks like your student doesn't belong in this exam, Kakashi-san. And no, surprisingly, it was meek little Hinata that spoke up. Naruto-kun is much stronger than that. As the smoke and rubble from the collision dispersed, Naruto stood up, rubbing his stomach with a wince. He grinned, you're stronger than I thought. He unsheathed the sword on his back, the scabbard disappearing into thin air. Several people gasped and Naruto's grin widened, let's see how you fare. A katana, Kenjutsu. Kurenai glared at Kakashi, how could you be so irresponsible? Teaching that kind of thing to a genin. I didn't, Kakashi responded neutrally. Either he's been hiding it in a scroll all this time or he got it during the 2nd exam. Snarling, Kiba leapt at Naruto claws first, swiping towards his opponent's chest. Holding his weapon one-handed, the blonde deflected the blow easily, knocking Kiba to the side. A dark growl rising up in his chest, the Inuzuka turned around, taking another swing. Again, Naruto deflected it, flinging a foot out to trip the other boy. Kiba tumbled, head first, to the ground, his momentum carrying him several feet. Rolling, he flipped back onto his feet, digging his nails into the tile in an effort to slow his movement. An angry snarl curled at his lips, exposing his large incisors to all of the shinobi present. He reached into his kunai pouch, pulling out 3 smoke bombs. He flung them, watching as they exploded and shrouded Naruto in a thick cloud. He grinned, seeing Orochimaru sneak up behind the blonde. This tactic was one he knew would work and it was definitely to his advantage. His enemy couldn't see, but he could smell where his opponent was and that left Kiba with the upper hand. A scream alerted him to his pup's success and he let a smirk crack his face. Naruto grabbed the dog by the scruff of its neck, awkwardly putting his hands into a seal. A poof later, a second Naruto stood next to him and he handed the puppy to his doppelganger, glaring. It was difficult, considering the amount of smoke clouding his vision. Scowling, he got his hands into another seal, channeling his chakra like he'd seen Kakashi do. In a burst of energy, the smoke dispersed and was blown away, much like the mist had when his sensei had used the skill. The bite, the dog, the smoke, it was all worth it to see the smirk on Kiba's face fall. Let Orochimaru go, Kiba snarled, eyes blazing with fury. What do you take me for, a fool? Naruto arched an eyebrow. Fine, Kiba reached into his pouch again, have it your way. He tossed a small pill, which Orochimaru promptly swallowed, his fur turning red as he growled. He spun, his claws dispelling the clone that held him. Running, he rushed past the stunned blonde to stand faithfully next to his partner, Kiba. Now, Kiba bent down, hands in a seal as Orochimaru jumped atop his back. Jujin Bunshin, man-beast clone. In a burst of smoke, a second Kiba had appeared in the place of the dog, smirking viciously at his opponent. Naruto blinked, surprised that such a technique even existed. Then, he grinned broadly, brandishing his sword offensively. Kurenai turned to Kakashi, her expression smug. I don't know how well you taught that boy, Kakashi-san, or even what you taught him, but he can't beat Kiba. No, Sakura whispered, having woken 2 minutes before, eyes glued to the battle before her. This isn't the limit. Naruto can do much more. Kurenai didn't look convinced and Kakashi refrained from commenting, but Hinata was silently agreeing with her fellow kunoichi. There was no way Naruto would lose this close to becoming Chunin. She caught Sakura's tiny grin out of the corner of her eye as her blonde crush spoke. Sôten ni zase, Naruto commanded, eyes glued to his opponent's, Hyôrinmaru. Oh no you don't. One Kiba cried as the two of them bounded forward on all fours. They spun, creating two vortexes that rushed forth side by side. Gatsuga, fang over fang. Kakashi palmed his face as Naruto dashed in their direction, sword trailing by his leg. He jumped as the collision became imminent, twisting to get between the two winding tornadoes. Kakashi's eye almost widened as the blonde managed to dodge the attacks completely, if only by a hair. As Naruto landed, Kakashi noticed something else. One of the vortexes suddenly twisted off course, colliding with the ground painfully. Dust rose, and as it cleared, a Kiba could be seen covered up to the neck in ice and wrapped in a chain. The chain reached all the way over to Naruto, connecting with the hilt of his sword. A crescent-shaped blade was attached to the other end of the string of metal links, stabbed into the ground. The second swirl of air and chakra dissipated and a second Kiba landed, staring at the frozen mass that encompassed his comrade. He growled, "Orochimaru." Calmly, Naruto walked over to his captive, staring down at the dog-turned boy impassively. Bending down, he pulled the crescent blade from the tiled floor, dropping it immediately afterwards. He reared his fist back, punching the ice with all of his strength. It shattered under his power, the transformation dropping to reveal Kiba's puppy. "Orochimaru," Kiba cried. Naruto turned at the sound of his voice, the crescent and chain retracting into Hyôrinmaru's hilt. The sword looked as if nothing had happened. "You," Kiba snarled. He ran forward again, once more transforming into a spinning vortex as he shouted, "Suga!" Piercing fang. Naruto leapt over the attack, turning around in midair as he brought his sword up. Both hands tightened over the hilt, the blue wrappings rubbing comfortably against his palm. With a jerk of movement, he began his downward swing. An azure dragon jolted forth from the blade's majestic arc, its red eyes gleaming. Rain over the frozen sky, Hinata muttered as Kurenai's mouth dropped open in surprise. The dragon roared as it soared for its target, carving a winding path through the air of the arena. Kiba stopped spinning and turned around, shock etched onto his face as the beast charged towards him. "Kiba-kun," Kurenai called in alarm, her composure regained. Her voice seemed to snap the Inuzuka boy out of his stupor, and he dodged at the last second, watching as the dragon collided with the tiled floor. A large ice spike remained protruding from the ground, its edges jagged and sharp. Cold steel pressed up against Kiba's neck. Naruto stood in front of him, Hyorinmaru poised threateningly against his opponent's jugular vein. The blonde's eyes were as icebergs floating in the frosted sea. "You lose." Kiba jerked forward, clutching at his stomach where Naruto had punched him as his knees fell from under him. Blackness intruded upon his vision and, with a heavy thump, Kiba collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Naruto swung his sword over his shoulder, placing it in the sheath that had just reappeared as if from nowhere. Hayate knelt down, checking on the Inuzuka boy. He stood a second later, raising his hand in the blonde's direction as he said, in the loudest voice he could muster, "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. Hyuga Hinata vs Hyuga Neji. I never thought I'd be facing you," Neji said, a cold grin on his lips. "Hinata-sama." "Neji Nisan," Hinata whispered. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank you, Hinata-sama," Neji's mouth twisted into an angry snarl, "for causing my father's death." "And no, I. Still stuttering, Neji scoffed. "I can sense your inferiority complex from here. I bet you didn't even want to enter this exam. You just did so because your teammates wanted to." "No," Hinata interrupted. "I entered this exam, to change myself." Neji's eyes narrowed. "You really are a spoiled brat of the main house, aren't you? Don't you understand? People cannot change. A loser like you will always be a loser." "Shut up." Neji's hateful eyes flickered to Naruto, the origin of the angry command. "You and your destiny crap aren't worth shit. Hinata-san, kick that jerk into next week." Hinata moved into a stance. Neji caught it out of the corner of his eye and smirked, mimicking her. "Begin." In an instant, they were at each other's throats. The 10-foot distance that separated them closed almost like magic and, in a flash, they were mere inches apart. Neji ducked under Hinata's first strike, stepping inside her guard and aiming his own attack at her heart. Hinata quickly dodged to the side, going against the traditional Juken motions by throwing a roundhouse kick into Neji's stomach. Neji used his momentum to duck under her kick, tucking his body into a ball as he rolled out of the way. Faster than most could follow, he was on his feet again, flying towards Hinata with as much speed as he possessed. Hinata moved to the side of his first glowing hand, but wasn't fast enough to dodge the follow-up attack of Neji's left hand. Her shoulder burning in pain, Hinata stumbled backwards, clutching at where her cousin had made contact. "Come on, princess," a voice whispered in her ear. She looked over her shoulder as the world halted, come eye to eye with a majestic phoenix, its feathers shimmering from golden to crimson with every move. Beady bronze eyes looked down a plum-colored beak at her. Hinata couldn't speak. "Are you going to let this boy do this to you?" Who are? Hinata stuttered, eyes wide. "You know my name, Hinata-chan," the phoenix whispered, landing on the girl's shoulder and rubbing its head against her cheek affectionately. An inexplicable warmth worked its way through her body, sending a pleasurable shiver from her head to her toes. "You've always known my name." The phoenix let out a loud trill, its voice in the almost musical notes contained within echoing as it spread its wings. "Now speak it. Speak my name and show the world just how strong you are." The world jerked to a start. Hinata reached her hand forwards, grasping at air as her eyes narrowed in determination. "Hajike, Tobiame." Prongs of red energy swirled in the air and coalesced into an oblong shape, then formed a sword in Hinata's palm as Neji dashed towards her again, hands coated with chakra. With a wild, uncharacteristic scream, Hinata pointed the tip of her new blade at her cousin. A ball of pink energy shot forward, but Neji dodged around it, moved inside her guard, and knocked the weapon from her grasp. It clattered to the ground uselessly. "You are within my field of hake." Hinata's head whipped around just in time to see the angry, piercing expression on her cousin's face, followed quickly by Neji's blazing hands. The fingers struck home and she felt two of her tenketsu close. Two palms, a swarm of hands, too fast for her to catch the individual motions, struck her, leaving 4 spots on her body very sore. 4 palms, another swarm came and the number of hits her body took quadrupled. 8 palms, 16 palms, a third swarm rained down on her, stealing her strength and chakra from her. 32 palms, the last swarm came faster than the rest, some striking spots on her body that were already sore from previous hits. 64 palms, the final strike, the 65th palm, came at her, throwing her back a few feet where she collapsed to the ground. "This is the difference in talent that will never change," Neji said acidly. "This is the destiny that you cannot alter." Hinata stood shakily. "It's not over, just give up," Neji told her. "Go back to being the weakling of the main branch. Go back to suffering at the fate of our family's differences. Say you see can see everything," Hinata stuttered weakly. "But I think you're overlooking something. The one suffering from the differences in our family, is you." In a flash, several people had moved to stand between the two Hyuga. Several Jonin, including Hayate, surrounded the white-eyed boy, poised to intercept if he chose to move further and kill his cousin. Naruto, to the surprise of the adults standing with him, had his blade set and ready to slit Neji's throat, his eyes icy. "Sôten ni zase," Naruto whispered coldly as a pressure seemed to press down on the entire room. "Hyorin." "That's enough, Naruto-kun," Kakashi stated calmly, his tone firm and brooking no argument. The pressure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared and Naruto turned his head, staring at his Jonin-sensei with his frigid eyes. A pained cough dragged Naruto's attention onto the Hyuga heiress, Hinata, as she fell backwards and, in an instant, he was by her side. Kakashi had to blink, wondering if the boy hadn't mastered some sort of speed-related jutsu. Did I? Hinata coughed violently, small amounts of blood mixing with her saliva. Her sword had become a katana. Her eyes were closed. Did I do good, Naruto-kun?" "Yeah," Naruto whispered soothingly, even knowing that she couldn't hear him. She'd lost consciousness barely a second after asking. "You did great." Blood trickled from her mouth, alarming Naruto greatly. The only explanation was internal bleeding, and considering the numerous internal injuries she had to be suffering from, she might not make it all the way to the hospital. He swore mentally, knowing there was nothing he could do. "I wouldn't be so hasty, child," a soft voice said. Naruto's gaze jerked to his right, Hyorinmaru's heavy snout hovering over his shoulder as the dragon took in Hinata's injured form. To Naruto's shock, the world had stopped and not a soul was moving or even breathing. "I will provide and manipulate the energy, all you have to do is move your hand where I tell you." Naruto nodded quickly, desperate to save the girl so like himself. Instantly, the world started up again as Hyorinmaru disappeared. No more than a second later, Naruto was flooded with a powerful feeling and his body felt lighter than air. Now, Hyorinmaru's voice whispered softly, unzip her jacket and take it off. The first place we must pay attention to is her heart. Nodding almost imperceptibly, Naruto dutifully unzipped the girl's heavy jacket and brushed the flaps aside. He blushed slightly at the sight of her feminine assets, restrained only by a tight black shirt, but knocked the thought away as he rested his palm, glowing white, against her sternum. "What are you doing?" Kurenai demanded from him hotly, but he ignored her, moving his hand further down to rest on her bruised stomach at Hyorinmaru's command. Strangely enough, he could, and this confused him, feel the damaged capillaries and taut smooth muscles heal under his fingers. Once more, he moved his hand, delicately peeling her jacket off so as to reach her arms. He watched in amazement as the purpling flesh slowly returned to its natural cream color under his touch, until no sign of the bruises remained. The glow dissipated. Turning his head slightly, Naruto leveled a glare at Neji as exhaustion slowly set in, growling out, "In the finals, you're going down." Barely a second later, he collapsed backwards, unconscious and snoring. Sighing in exasperation, Kakashi hefted his student onto his shoulder as medics carried away the Hyuga girl. "Naruto-kun, your flames of youth are most passionate," Maeda Guy said seriously, more to himself than anyone else. "Yoshi, if Hinata-san makes a full recovery, I will run around Konoha on my hands 500 times. And if I can't do that, I'll scale the Hokage monument with nothing but my teeth. And if I can't do that, I'll do 100,000 push-ups using only my right index finger." "Yoshi. Guy-sensei," Rock Lee cried excitedly, "your youthful passions are overflowing." "Yoshi." The ninth match was Gaara vs. Rock Lee. Lee's eyes blazed. "Yada. It is finally my turn." Lee put up a good fight and was able to land a few good hits on Gaara, but Gaara was just too strong. In the end, Lee had shown that he could open the celestial gates and the power they held. But it wasn't any match for Gaara's sand, which crushed the bones in Lee's left arm and leg. He was carried off on a stretcher, the medics saying he wouldn't be able to be a shinobi ever again. The last match was Akamichi Choji vs. Dosu Kinuta. Choji lost pretty quickly. He simply couldn't win against Dosu's sound techniques. Even with his Baika no Jutsu and his meat tank, he wasn't able to win against the Oto Nin. Now then, Sandaime stood in front of the remaining examinees. "Each of you will draw a piece of paper from the box Anko-san is holding. This will decide who faces who in the finals." Kakashi drew one for his sleeping student and one for his hospitalized student. Naruto, 1. Sasuke, 4 Dosu, 8 Shikamaru, 9 Temari, 7 Kankuro, 5. Gaara, 3 Neji, 2 Shino, 6 Ibiki showed them a chart. It depicted the opponents for the finals. Match 1. Uzumaki Naruto vs. Hyuga Neji. Match 2. Sabaku no Gaara vs. Uchiha Sasuke. Match 3. Kankuro vs. Aburame Shino. Match 4. Dosu Kinuta vs. Temari. Match 5. Match 4. Victor vs. Nara Shikamaru. When Naruto awoke, something fuzzy was tickling his nose and his arms were thrown over something large and wide. Blearily, he opened his eyes to see the gravity-defying white hair of his Jonin-sensei and the cobblestone streets of his home village, Konohagakure no Sato. He blinked, mumbling weakly, "Huh. Oh, Naruto-kun." Kakashi glanced back at him, adjusting the boy's position on his back. "You're awake." "Good." Naruto answered lamely. "What happened? I didn't know you could forget that kind of thing," Kakashi said calmly, his tone monotonous. "After all, several people are wondering how you managed to heal such severe injuries when you yourself know nothing about medical ninjutsu." Kurenai-san was livid. "Don't know," Naruto muttered, resting his pounding head against Kakashi's shoulder. "Hyôrinmaru told me what to do." "Hyôrinmaru." Kakashi posed, hiding his shock. "Your sword told you how to heal someone?" "Not just a sword." Naruto loosed a jaw-cracking yawn. "He's a dragon, too." Tenten-san said something about sealed in a sword. "Oh," Kakashi asked. "And this sword, this dragon, Hyorinmaru, where did you get him? How long have you had him?" "Forever," Naruto said tiredly. "According to him, he's been with me forever. He's only been a sword since the second part of the exam." Kakashi frowned. He was getting mixed signals. "Are you sure he's safe, Naruto-kun? Are you sure he's a dragon? Are you sure he's not?" Kakashi silently braced himself for the question. "The Kyubi." "No, he's dragon all right," the blonde mumbled. Seen him and everything. Said something about being my sword and shield. Whatever that means. Kakashi remained silent as Naruto's apartment came into view, unsure of how to take this new information. It was hard to trust his student when it came to this matter, simply because the demon Fawkes sealed in the boy's belly was very strong and old. It had undoubtedly picked up quite a few tricks and methods of deception. He wanted to trust Naruto. He wanted to trust that his student knew what he was talking about and that everything was actually okay. It was just very hard to believe that the boy had some sort of guardian dragon now, one that could actually be used as a weapon. It was like something out of a fairy tale. Ninja didn't believe in fairy tales. Ninja believed in cold hard facts, undeniable truths, and what they could gather using their own senses. Good ninja even questioned the possible falsehood of these things. After all, Genjutsu was the art of illusion and sensory deception. Hatake Kakashi was a good ninja. There weren't many alternative possibilities, though, and that alarmed Kakashi. Naruto had confirmed, almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Kyubi was not involved at all. Sasuke was given the curse mark by Orochimaru during the second exam. The only possibility that fit in the realm of reality, besides the one that Naruto was telling the truth, was that Orochimaru had given Naruto the sword. That was an even more absurd likelihood, simply for the fact of who Naruto was. Beyond the fact that Naruto was the child with the nine-tailed fox sealed inside him, he was also the son of the Yondaime Hokage, the one person Orochimaru hated above all else. The hubby Sennin would not take an interest in the child of his most hated enemy, the man who had stolen the position he had wanted above everything. That meant that Naruto wasn't lying, he was telling the truth. It wasn't the Kyubi manipulating him either, because the demon Fawkes lacked any form of control over the world outside of the seal that bound him. What it all boiled down to was that Hyorinmaru really was a dragon and a sword. The question was the how. The existence and dual identity of Hyorinmaru was new and unprecedented. There had never before been a sword capable of sentient thought, nor had there ever been a dragon that could become a sword, mostly because there also weren't any dragons. What Naruto had was revolutionary. Kakashi knew, though, that revolutionary abilities like this were usually guarded and bred into clans by the Council of Fire. For now, he would keep his mouth shut. If word got to the council that Naruto possessed some kind of bloodline, they would probably run an insurmountable number of tests on his blonde student, regardless of what harm they did to the boy. Because of the demon Fox's presence inside him, Naruto was nothing more than a slab of meat to the old men and women of the council. So long as he drew breath, Kakashi wouldn't let them treat his sensei's legacy in such a manner. He owed a great deal to the fourth Hokage, and he wasn't about to let such a thing happen to the only child of his father figure. If for no other reason, he was going to protect Naruto. Gently shifting his cargo, he eased open the blonde's apartment door, nearly wincing as the hinges squeaked. Naruto was out cold, however, and didn't even stir at the obnoxious noise. He silently breathed a sigh of relief, slipping his sandals off as he walked into the small flat. His eyes adjusted immediately to the darkness within as he looked around. It took him a minute, but he found what he was looking for and opened the door to the boy's bedroom. Thankfully, it didn't squeak or creak even the tiniest bit as he eased it from its closed state. Gently, he set the blonde down on the futon unrolled in the center of the room. He slowly pulled the blonde's sandals off, setting them up against the wall next to the door. He reached to take the sword off of his student's back, but a cold chill ran down his spine as his fingers neared the hilt and he immediately thought better of it. He pulled the covers up, tucking them under boy's chin. A sudden feeling of guilt and longing struck him and he backed up, gazing at Naruto sadly as he quietly closed the door. He deftly maneuvered his way through the darkness, locking the front door as he left. With one last backward glance, he vanished in a swirl of leaves. Naruto rubbed his eyes, slowly standing up. His sandals sunk in the snow, but no feeling of coldness reached him as the white fuzz buried his toes. He looked around, only to discover he had once more returned to the world of Hyorinmaru. He blinked, wondering just why he was back. "You're here," the dragon's voice said calmly, the beast swerving its long body around him. It twisted till it was looking him in the eyes, its lower body coiled around his feet and legs. "Tell me, child, do you know why you're here?" "No," Naruto started, shaking his head. His tongue froze mid-motion as images flashed through his mind and in front of his eyes, reminding him of what he'd done. His glowing white hand resting on Hinata's chest, Hyorinmaru hovering over his shoulder, his palm gliding over her smooth arms, and falling back into unconsciousness. That energy, Naruto began slowly, his mind working a minute. What was it? It wasn't chakra. Good. The dragon cooed, its eyes narrowing slightly. You've started to become more observant. You've started to behave more like a dragon. Like a shinobi. Hyorinmaru moved closer, until its snout was mere inches from his face. The two thin, long, fleshy feelers beneath its nostrils wavered in a non-existent wind as it spoke. As you well know, chakra is made of physical and spiritually energy perfectly blended, but did you know that you could separate those energies and use them individually? Naruto's eyes widened as he slowly shook his head. Hyorinmaru continued, Kai, or Ki, is the body's physical energy, and, if used properly, can be used to supplement limbs and such. Because of its nature, Kai is useful only for augmentation of physical movements. Kai cannot be used for direct attack. Raryoku, however, or spirit energy, is what allows chakra to be channeled for jutsu. By itself, Raryoku has several uses that can be helpful to the life of a shinobi. The easiest example was how you healed that girl of such life-threatening injuries. Beyond that, Raryoku can be used to form attacks and the like with which you can defeat your enemies. When it is not mixed into chakra, Raryoku is incapable of molding the elements. I get what you're saying, Hyorinmaru. Naruto started quietly, a confused gleam in his gaze, but what's the point of telling me? I don't know how to manipulate Raryoku, so how's it going to help me? Hyorinmaru grinned, baring his large, sharp teeth. Quite simple, actually. You may not know how, but that does not mean you are incapable of learning. Naruto's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, a ghost of a grin stretching at his lips. You mean? The dragon's grin widened. Tomorrow, you will seek out that white-haired teacher of yours and have him teach you during the afternoons. In the mornings, from dawn's first light till the sun has reached its midday zenith, I will be teaching you to mold and use your Raryoku as a weapon. Really? Naruto asked excitedly, his eyes sparkling as the dragon nodded. He thrust his arms into the air, his own grin threatening to split his face. Yada. This is going to be so cool. Wait. He refocused back onto the dragon still coiled around his lower body. Does this stuff require hand seals? As Hyorinmaru shook his head, Naruto leapt into the air, whooping loudly. He laughed excitedly. All right. I'm gonna be an awesome ninja. Ha, take that Sasuke. You can't copy my jutsu, because they don't use hand seals. Naruto grunted as the dragon knocked him to the ground with its tail, hitting the earth face first and making an imprint in the snow. The dragon sighed, more to himself than anything. Good grief. I don't think I could have taken much more of that. As the blonde stood, rubbing his head, the dragon leveled a glare at him. You must learn to contain your excitement or else nothing I teach you will help. Shinobi are silent and cunning. You are beginning to understand and apply this concept, but you must control such loud and annoying impulses. Naruto nodded, thoroughly cowed. Hyorinmaru cooed. Good. Now. The dragon swiveled away, leaving Naruto to stand alone as it faced him. Your training begins immediately. It had taken him a while and more than a little bit of asking and eavesdropping, but Naruto had finally come upon the information he'd been looking for. When he'd set out in the morning, he hadn't figured it'd be so hard to find two very special people amongst the shinobi populace. He figured it wouldn't have taken him more than a half an hour, tops. Unfortunately, it had wound up taking him nearly 3 hours just to come across the information he'd been seeking. He probably would have had better luck just sending clones to search the village. He probably would have cut the time it took for him to search in half. All he'd had to do was listen to his instincts. If he had listened to what his mind was telling him to do instead of what he figured Sakura would tell him to do, he would have accomplished his set goal much earlier. Things would have been much easier on him and he would have finished his task at 8 o'clock instead of the current time, 10:46. Finally, after searching for the location of Hinata and Sasuke, Naruto walked through the glass doors of the hospital. He walked up to the receptionist's desk, asking for the room numbers belonging to the two people he that wanted to visit. The reception he got wasn't what he was expecting. What? He demanded angrily. What do you mean? Why not? I'm sorry, she told him, only sounding half apologetic, but Hyuga-sama is still unconscious and Sasuke-sama has been forbidden from having any visitors at all. Fine, I can't visit Sasuke-tem. At least let me visit, his voice softened. At least let me visit Hinata-chan. The nurse blinked, then sighed, "Look, kid, I'd like to let you see her, but I'm not allowed." "Why not?" Naruto demanded vehemently. "Why can't I visit Hinata-chan?" The nurse opened her mouth to reply, but Naruto didn't give her the chance. "Are you one of those people? The kind that spits at my feet when my back's turned? The kind that would drive a wooden stake through my heart just to see if I bleed?" He slammed his fists down on the desk, his voice loud. "Well, I'm not going to sit here and take this. I'm going to find Hinata-chan even if I have to spend the whole day just looking for Naruto-kun," a voice called calmly. "This is a hospital. You're supposed to be quiet." "Oh." Naruto spun around, instantly brightening. "Kakashi-sensei, listen, there's something I wanted to ask you." "Ma." Kakashi held up a hand, stopping whatever Naruto had been about to say. "I know what you're going to ask and I'm sorry, but I can't train you." Naruto froze, his eyes wide in a disappointed frown on his face, his lips parted in mid-word. Kakashi recognized the symptoms immediately and knew that, were he not as old as he was, Naruto would be tearing up right now and ready to pout. He sighed. "Look, Naruto-kun," Kakashi started, dreading the upcoming conversation, "were things so easy, I'd love to spend the next month training you. Unfortunately, not only am I completely inept at Kenjutsu, I have to prepare Sasuke for his match against Gaara." "You're training Sasuke Tem?" Naruto asked, his voice suddenly frigid. "Why the hell can't you train me?" "I'd love to, Naruto-kun," Kakashi stated, trying to placate the blonde. "Now that you have such a powerful ice-type ability, I could show you some really awesome Suiten jutsu. The only problem is, your opponent is a calm leaf ninja. Win or lose, nobody's dying." Kakashi sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Gaara, though, is totally unstable. I have to prepare Sasuke for a fight against that maniac and, even then, I'm not sure he'd win. You, on the other hand, would be a perfect matchup." "Why?" Naruto asked, honestly curious. Kakashi thought he could take down Gaara. "Hyorinmaru," Kakashi stated, as if that explained everything. "Since he is a water and ice type ability, he'll make it much harder on Gaara to manipulate his sand. That would give you an amazing advantage and I have very few doubts that you'd fail to capitalize on it." "Then why can't you?" Naruto began, his voice something of a whine. "Look, Naruto-kun," Kakashi interrupted, holding out a scroll. "This is a jutsu scroll. On it is Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. I've found you an instructor to be my replacement and he's going to teach you chakra control. Whenever he feels you've gained enough control, he'll give you another, much more powerful Suiten jutsu scroll." Naruto nodded, his eyes wide. It wasn't exactly the training he'd been looking for, but considering the options Kakashi had left him with, Hyorinmaru was urging him to take the offer. His control sucked horribly, he knew that, and it had become much worse after Orochimaru had sealed off the demon Fawkes. Yet, he was stronger because of Orochimaru's little trick. Had the snake Sennin not blocked him off from the Kyubi, he doubted he would have found Hyorinmaru anytime soon. If there was one thing good to come of that meeting, Hyorinmaru was it. "Kakashi-san," Naruto looked towards the voice, only to find a man he easily recognized. A bit of dread filled him as he realized just who Kakashi's replacement was going to be. "Ah, Ebisu-san," Kakashi nodded. "I was just explaining things to Naruto. Listen, did you get those scrolls?" "Hi." Ebisu nodded, adjusting his sunglasses slightly. "As per your instructions, I'll give him one Suiten scroll whenever I feel he has enough control to perform the jutsu inside effectively." "He's going to teach me?" Naruto asked numbly, disbelief tainting his voice. "The closet pervert." "Oh." Kakashi smiled at him. "So you know each other? This makes things easier." "Know each other?" Naruto echoed hollowly. "I beat this guy in 5 seconds, with 2 jutsu." "Really?" Kakashi asked, feigning interest. Ebisu was the only one, besides perhaps himself, Jiraiya of the Sannin, and the Sandaime Hokage, that could properly teach Naruto. Since Ebisu was the only one available, it had to be Ebisu that taught Naruto. Ah, Ebisu seemed to teleport next to Naruto, clasping his hand over the boy's mouth. "He's just kidding, right, Naruto-kun?" Naruto glared. "I may not be a great fighter," the man hissed at his blonde captive, "but I'm an elite tutor. Teaching is my specialty. I can teach you things that'd make Sasuke-san's head spin." Naruto's eyes seemed to widen, then he nodded enthusiastically. Ebisu smiled in a disarming way. "We'll be fine, Kakashi-san. See you later." In a swirl of leaves, Ebisu and Naruto disappeared, leaving Kakashi to blink at their strange antics. Shrugging, he pulled out his little orange book and headed towards Sasuke's room. Naruto couldn't help but stare. Steam rose into the air as tiny wisps of vapor, slowly disappearing into the atmosphere. Water sloshed gently against rocks that contained it, but not one drop escaped the confines of the natural pool. Even several feet away, Naruto could feel the heat radiating from the pond. Despite the inviting atmosphere, Naruto had to wonder why he was there. He was supposed to be training, wasn't he? That had been the impression he'd gotten when Ebisu had promised to teach him things that would wow even Sasuke. And the first thing the elite teacher had done was make him read Kakashi's scroll. So why were they here, standing in front of a hot spring, an onsen, next to a wall? A wall behind which he could hear many giggling girls as they bathed away their daily worries. Why? Naruto asked, confused. Why are we here? The first thing we're going to do is test you, Naruto-kun, Ebisu told him. Since you are learning Suiten Jutsu, you are going to need a source of water. What I want you to do, Naruto-kun, is produce exactly 5 Mizu Bunshin. You have 2 tries. Nodding, Naruto stepped next to the hot spring and focused his chakra, his hands in a seal. He cried, Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. Around him, 7 water clones sprung into existence, each an identical copy of the original. Frowning, he dispersed them all, watching as they splashed back into water and made several puddles on the ground. Focusing again, he added less chakra than the first time, Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. 2 water clones appeared this time, Naruto's frustrated frown growing as he realized just how horrible his chakra control had to be. As his 2 doppelgangers splashed to the ground, Ebisu walked towards him. Since it seems that your control is severely lacking, Ebisu said in a lecturing tone, we'll have to rectify the problem. What you're going to be doing, Naruto-kun, is walking on water. Naruto stared at him for a second, momentarily speechless. What? Kakashi-san has told me that you already know the tree climbing exercise, Ebisu stated, proudly walking out onto the hot spring. This is the next step up. Try it for yourself. Tentatively, with Hyorinmaru hissing instructions into his ear, Naruto channeled chakra to his feet and walked out onto the surface of the heated pond, only to plummet straight to the bottom. Yowling painfully, Naruto jumped from the pool faster than Ebisu could see and landed straight up on the ground. As he got over the burning sensation on his flesh, he set his sword down, mumbling an apology to the dragon for letting that happen. Steel and water didn't mix very well and, though Naruto was aware that Hyorinmaru was no ordinary blade, he didn't want to risk letting his precious weapon rust. Taking off his orange jacket, Naruto channeled chakra again and took a slow step out onto the surface. It stayed and he smiled, confidently putting his other foot forward as he began to walk atop the water. On that second step, however, he once more fell straight into the water. Screaming in pain as the water burned him, he leapt up from it and landed once more on dry land. He hissed as the cool air rubbed roughly against his sensitive skin, waiting for it to turn back to its pale pink. It only took a few seconds, but during that time, Hyorinmaru took the opportunity to chastise him for being so hasty. Take it slowly, the dragon told him. Speed will earn you nothing in the end. Patience is the driving force behind success. Remember, Naruto, think like a dragon. Calming his frustration, Naruto focused his chakra once again and stepped out onto the water. His feet held as he walked steadily towards his temporary tutor, confident that he had this new skill down. Barely a second later, he fell into the hot water again, crying his anger and pain to the sky. Shaking his head in amusement, Ebisu looked past the boy at the fence opposite their section. His eyes widened. There was an old man with long white hair staring through a small hole in the fence, giggling like a schoolgirl. Ebisu fixed his glasses, scowling. I don't know who you are, he said, quietly at first, but I will not allow such shameful and dishonorable behavior. Ebisu rushed forward, his gaze stony as he focused on the indecent man in front of him. He glared at the pervert who simply ignored him in favor, giggling, raising his fist to teach the man a lesson. There was a poof of smoke and, before he could react, a long tongue shot out and hit him, knocking him away. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. Be quiet, the older man said sternly, perched atop a large toad. You don't want me to get caught, do you? Naruto stared for a second, then felt anger bubbling up inside his chest. You idiot. Now what am I supposed to do? He threw his hands up in exasperation. It was bad enough that the snake freak messed up my chakra with some sealing jutsu, but you had to come along and knock out my instructor. Snake freak? The old man echoed curiously. What do you mean? Where did he hit you? Some guy in the second exam, Naruto sighed. He did this weird thing with his fingers then hit me in the stomach. I see, the old man said pensively, rubbing his chin. Lift your shirt and channel some chakra. I think I have a solution. Whatever, Naruto mumbled, lifting his shirt as the man's fingers began to glow. He was hit by surprise, then the old man's fingers, when the 5 digits slammed into his stomach. Gogyo Kane, the old man called. After a second, he pulled his hand back to look at his work. The 5-prong seal that had overlapped the original seal faded away into nothingness. There, now try the water walking skill. Listening to the old man, Naruto took a delicate step onto the water. When it held, he took another step, then another, and he didn't fall in. Confident from his success, he walked at a faster speed until he was running around the small spring. He nearly yelled excitedly when he didn't fall in at all. The old man started to walk away, thinking he would slip past the boy's notice. He had no such luck as Naruto shouted, "Hey, don't think you're off the hook. This guy was supposed to be my teacher. Now you're going to have to fill that role." "No way," the old man yelled back. "I, Jiraiya the Gamma Sennin, don't have time to babysit a brat like you. Besides, you already learned what he was teaching you." "Nah, Naruto called back, forming a hand seal. 5 Mizu Bunshin stood around him. He was supposed to teach me some really cool Sôten jutsu whenever my control was good enough. "Fine," Jiraiya said angrily. "You want a Sôten jutsu? Sôten. Suiryuden." A dragon rose up from the hot spring behind Naruto, who panicked as it leered at him. He rushed to the shore, unsheathing his sword as the water dragon barreled towards him. He stabbed his sword forwards, into the dragon's mouth as he cried, "Sôten ni zase, Hyôrinmaru." Instantly, before Jiraiya's surprised eyes, the dragon of water froze into a solid mass. Naruto twisted his sword and the dragon cracked and splintered before it shattered into thousands of pieces. With flourish, Naruto sheathed his sword. When he had used the Suiryuden, Jiraiya hadn't intended to harm the boy, far from it. The jutsu had only been pumped with enough chakra to soak the blonde and knock him off his feet. He didn't think the kid could counter it, or that if he could, he would be too shocked to do so in time. The moment he'd seen the boy, Jiraiya knew who he was. It was hard not to. He would have had to be blind not to recognize the kid with the 9 tails stuck in his stomach. He would have had to be blind not to recognize his prized student's only child. The boy had spiky blonde hair and blue eyes. No matter who you were, if you were from Konoha, you would recognize those traits. At first glance, Jiraiya had considered training the boy, as he had the kid's father. He'd decided against it in the end. It would bring back too many happy memories that would just end up making him sad and depressed. Even now, nearly 13 years after the Yondaim's death, it was still an open and sore wound. Any part of him that had wanted to train the boy had died as soon as the blonde had used Mizu Bunshin and told him he was learning Sôten. Learning Sôten jutsu meant that the kid's chakra had an affinity for water. The problem with that is that Jiraiya's didn't, so he couldn't teach him as much about Sôten as Sarutobi. But now, the dragon had turned to ice after being struck by Naruto's sword. To turn something to ice, you needed both a water and wind affinity in your chakra. The sword just seemed to be a tool, a chakra blade used to cast techniques without hand seals and at a short distance. Jiraiya grinned. This kid was pretty interesting. "Okay, kid," he said, a cocky grin on his lips, "I think I'll train you after all." "You will?" Naruto asked excitedly, eyes shining with hope. "Yeah," he said, crossing his arms. "After all, as one of the Sannin, I know more about Sôten than anyone in this village, save the Hokage." "You do?" Naruto's face split into a large grin and Jiraiya immediately knew he had a disciple in the arts of ninjutsu. "Yeah," he said confidently. "Now, come on, let's take this to a more appropriate place, one with lots more water." Secretly, to himself, Jiraiya smirked. "Hook, line, sinker. Come on, Arrow Sennin." Jiraiya almost froze at the nickname, watching as Naruto ran down the road. This brat, he might be more trouble than he was worth. The sound of rushing water flowed past his senses, the smell of the liquid permeating his nostrils. The grass, taller than normal, tickled his bare toes incessantly. The wind blew gently, tousling his spiky hair. He grinned, excitement flowing through him. They had traveled to a river, one that Naruto hadn't even known existed. It was atop a waterfall that emptied into a pond that girls seemed to like to swim in, so Naruto could guess why Jiraiya had chosen this particular river. Still, the old man was going to teach him, so he wasn't going to complain. Right, Jiraiya clapped his hands together. I've already showed you the hand seals, so let's see how good you are at Suiryuden. Naruto nodded, flashing through hand signs numbering in the dozens. He stopped on Bird, watching as the river churned unnaturally. A beast's head began to form, sucking the water from its surroundings. Suiryuden no Jutsu. A winding dragon leapt from the water, twisting and turning in the air before it crashed back into its source. The river returned to normal, as if nothing had even happened. Jiraiya nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, let's try it while you're walking on the river. Nodding, Naruto took a step out onto the water, standing atop it without trouble. The river around his feet rippled slightly, but showed no sign of letting him fall through. Slowly, he walked to the center, making sure that the current wouldn't push him downstream. With a great deal more concentration, he went through the hand seals again, calling, Suiryuden. Much more slowly than it initially had, the dragon of water formed in front of him, its gaping maw snarling. It jumped from the river surface towards an imaginary enemy standing a good distance away from the blonde, then sunk back into the water as it hit its non-existent target. Alright, the elder man muttered. It had taken him longer the second time than it had the first. Again. Naruto went through the hand seals once more, much faster than the second time. The dragon rose for a third time, marginally faster than either the first or second attempt. With a silent roar, the dragon dove into the river again a great distance away. It collided with a loud splash, throwing water up and out several feet. Jiraiya couldn't help but marvel at the power the kid had, mentally whistling as the third dragon dissolved back to its base element. Even elite Jonin from the Hidden Mist village could only manage one or two before the chakra consumption started to affect them. But Naruto had pulled off 3 without even breathing heavily. Good, Jiraiya nodded. Now we're ready to move on to the next thing I have to teach you, Kuchiyos no Jutsu. In a blur, Naruto was at Jiraiya's side, grinning eagerly. Clearing his throat, Jiraiya continued, his voice lecturing, for this technique, however, you're going to need more than your normal amount of chakra. You've felt your secondary chakra, right? That's what you're going to have to use. Naruto shook his head, sorry, Ero Sennin, but I'm not going to use Fluffy's power. If I use it like you're suggesting, then I'll become dependent on it, and my own power will grow weak. I'm not going to call on Kyubi's chakra. What? Jiraiya asked incredulously, his expression surprised. Who taught you that? It's ridiculous. Why have all that power locked away if you're not going to use it? Naruto's eyes grew cold. That is the way of the dragon, Ero Sennin. Rely on your own power and the power of your friends, get stronger through hard work, and take no shortcuts. Be wise both in life and in battle and use force only when necessary. That is the way of the dragon. It's the principle I've dedicated my life to. Good, child, Hyorinmaru cooed, whispering in his ear. You are learning well what I have taught to you. This is the path you walk, the path of wisdom, the path of the protector. Do not let any sway you from its course. Alright, Jiraiya sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. If you're that serious about it, I guess we can just use your normal chakra. If we can build it up high enough, you won't need the Fawkes' chakra. Naruto nodded, his expression suddenly cheery again. Jiraiya scratched his head, wondering if the boy was bipolar. Shrugging, he bit his thumb and went through hand seals, right. First, I'll show you how. He thrust his palm to the ground, several chains of kanji spreading over the rocks beneath his feet. There was a puff of smoke and standing beneath Jiraiya was a large toad slightly taller than the man himself. In its mouth was a scroll, the toad's tongue unrolling to drop it on the ground. Write your name in blood, like those written before you, Jiraiya commanded as Naruto unraveled the scroll. The seals are boar, dog, bird, monkey, and ram. In order to summon, you must spread a little blood on the hand you used to sign your name on the scroll. The blonde looked over the names written in blood on the large scroll, recognizing only a few of them. Jiraiya's was easy to see, written in large and fancy penmanship. To the right were several unfamiliar names, each one older and more archaic than the last. To the left of the Gamma Senins, though, was a name that Naruto had memorized a long time ago, Namikaze Minato. It was the 4th Hokage. That was all the endorsement he needed. Naruto couldn't help the grin that split his face as he bit into his right thumb, going just deep enough to draw blood. Carefully, he signed his name on the scroll using that blood, then dabbed each of his fingers with it. He pressed the tips of the fingers on his right hand against the thick rice paper, knowing that they would leave an impression. Naruto rolled to scroll back up, watching as the toad pulled it back into its mouth and disappeared. Jiraiya fell back to the ground with a soft clatter, hands on his hips as he looked at the blonde boy expectantly. Nodding, the blonde bit his thumb and swiped it over his right palm, flashing through the hand seals required. Thrusting his hand down, spider web chains of kanji spread from the point of contact. There was a puff of smoke, the wind blowing it away quickly. As it cleared, Jiraiya looked, somewhat shocked, as Naruto appeared from within it, riding atop a toad as tall as himself. Jiraiya scratched his chin absent-mindedly, a giddy feeling rising up in his stomach. A grin stretched across his face as he began to giggle slightly, the prospect before him exciting him beyond belief. 13 years after his previous star student had died, he had found a new student, one nearly as capable as the 4th Hokage. This boy, a no-talent loser according to the academy records, had so much potential that he almost couldn't believe it. What seemed even more unbelievable was that no one had noticed. This blonde brat had the potential to surpass all of the Hokage to date, even his own father, the Yondaime. The amount of chakra his body held was staggering and he never seemed to tire, despite the strain that normal Jonin-level ninja would be suffering under identical conditions. What was more, the kid already had 2 affinities, ones that could be combined to create something much more powerful. He was also the perfect match-up against the Uchiha Sasuke Jiraiya had heard so much about. While the blonde's wind chakra would be weak against the Uchiha's fire, his water chakra would easily overcome Sasuke's affinity. By combining both, he got rid of the wind's weakness to fire and could turn whole battlefields to his advantage. The Gamma Sennin almost trembled in giddy anticipation. This kid really was interesting. Alright, Jiraiya said, watching the toad disappear, that's enough for today. Go home and get a good night's rest. Meet me here tomorrow afternoon. Remember to eat some lunch. And, with a puff of smoke, Jiraiya vanished. The sun rose over the easterly trees, painting the sky in brilliant tones of red, orange, yellow, and pink. The dark, navy blue sky steadily turned to a delicate azure, puffy white clouds decorating it. The trill of morning birds lilted in the air, singing a serenade of peace to the world. Few were awake, save for those dedicated to their training, despite their questionable sanity. Guy-sensei, a voice called in the distance. Lee, came the answer. Focus, Naruto told himself calmly, feeling the dragon's eyes on the back of his head. Focus the energy, circulate it to your hand, gathering it within the palm and fingers. Let it grow. Pure energy spiraled through his body, flowing freely through his limbs. It rose through him, from his toes all the way to the roots of his hair. The feeling was invigorating and left him feeling invincible, as though nothing earthly could touch him. It was as if he was some higher being capable only of being defeated by the stars themselves. He breathed in and the universe was at his beck and call. As the energy rushed through his cells and molecules, he grasped for it, preparing to shape it for its purpose. It slipped from his fingers several times, gliding over his mental palms like sand over the desert. It would not be tamed and Naruto began to feel the slight chill in the air as it took on a mind of its own. Concentrating, Naruto grabbed it, refusing to let go. It stuck this time and he opened his shining eyes, calmly aiming his hand at a tree. With but a slight push, the energy gathered as he told it to in the palm of his hand. Tonelessly, he said, Hado no Sanjusen, Sokatsui. A violent discharge was the only warning that Naruto had before the ball of blue power leapt from his hand, soaring at amazing speeds towards its target. The poor tree had no chance and neither did the 6 trees beside it or the dozen trees behind it. All 19 trees were incinerated by the blast, naught but ashes to remain. Wow, Naruto grinned, looking down at his normal fingers with excitement. That was amazing, and it was only number 33. Naruto grasped at the energy again, forming it in the tip of his right index finger, saying, now for number 4. The power gathered again, arcing over his body and through his arm, converging at his fingertip. He continued to push it towards that one point, waiting for the right amount to have gathered. He waited as it festered and grew, his finger beginning to glow brightly. Finally, as the power reached an apex, he called, Hado no Yan, Byakurai. A bolt of white lightning leapt from his finger, soaring outward at an amazing speed. It struck the tree he had been pointing at, blowing a wide hole straight through its large and thick trunk. Several trees behind, nearly a dozen by his count, suffered the same fate, creaking dangerously as their support faltered. With a crash, they all fell to the earth, never to bloom again. "Do you see, Naruto-kun?" Hyorinmaru asked, locking gazes with him. "The power of Raryoku." "Yeah," he said, awe decorating his voice, "it's awesome. You sure do know quite a bit about this kind of stuff, Hyorinmaru. At this rate, I'll be Hokage before I know it." "Indeed," the dragon commented amusedly. It turned its head away. "That's enough practice for now. Let's move on. Have you finished your little project?" "I'm close," Naruto said, scratching his head sheepishly. "I've figured most of the stuff out, but I need to find a way to make it summon you. So far, it doesn't summon anything. I must congratulate you," Hyorinmaru said, his voice filled with paternal praise. This idea was quite crafty and cunning. Many would call it a very Fawkes-like idea. I say it is an idea worthy of a dragon. "Thanks," Naruto laughed happily. "I took one look at Ero Sennin's summoning scroll and decided to make one for you. Toads are nice and all, but they're just not suited for my abilities. So I'll just summon you. See, the way I figure, since it's a time-space jutsu, I can summon anything that doesn't fully exist in the realm of reality." Hyorinmaru nodded. To come up with such a thing after seeing it only once is quite admirable. "I have no doubt that you will succeed." Somehow, Naruto could tell that the dragon was looking at him out of the corner of its eye. "When you do, I have quite an interesting skill to teach you." A shiver of anticipation traveled down Naruto's spine, raising tiny bumps all over his arms. He wasn't sure if the shiver of anticipation was one of eagerness or if it was of an ominous origin. The latter seemed much more plausible because of the icy block that had suddenly lodged itself in his stomach. Hyorinmaru rarely called something interesting. Considering how knowledgeable the dragon was, there wasn't much that it could claim was interesting. There were several things that it took an interest in, but it never used such a word to describe those things. He preferred to call it a healthy dose of curiosity. If it was a technique he was teaching Naruto, he always made it seem insignificant to him, but very important to the blonde boy. He used all sorts of words and phrases to entice him into learning, but interesting had never been one of them. If he was using it to describe something, that something had to be beyond cool. Naruto called Sasuke's fire jutsu cool. Hyorinmaru scoffed at them, claiming that such skills were easily learned and acquired by anyone with an attention span. Naruto called Rock Lee's speed and taijutsu awesome. Hyorinmaru chastised him for admiring the boy's abilities when he could be working towards acquiring them for himself. Naruto thought Kakashi was one of the best. Hyorinmaru assured him that there were better. So for Hyorinmaru to call something interesting, it had to be beyond powerful. It had to be even more powerful than the destruction spells the dragon was teaching him to use. It had to be stronger than Kakashi's signature move. Naruto shivered again. He was either really lucky or in deep shit. Naruto stood shakily, panting as sweat rolled down his cheeks and nose, his blue eyes drooping slightly. The water around him churned as yet another dragon dissolved into it, splashing the riverbanks harshly. He fought to stay atop the surface as the movement of the water body compromised his footing. Again came the command and Naruto obeyed. He flashed through the hand seals, stopping on bird and watching as the water in front of him swirled and rose to form a dragon. It seemed to roar as it jumped forwards at an invisible target. It crashed back into the river, causing turbulence over the surface. He struggled to stay atop. After his success at summoning, Jiraiya had decided that it would be best to hammer out his skills in Sweden by making him practice till he dropped. Along with Suiryuden, the old man had taught him Daibikufu no Jutsu and Sujinheki and had him practice them alongside it. The old man was determined to make him a Sweden master before the Chunin exam finals. For the 3 weeks he'd been training under the elder shinobi, he'd become quite proficient in water-style techniques. Jiraiya wasn't the only one training him in jutsu. After Naruto had perfected several of the spells he'd been teaching the blonde, Hyorinmaru had started to have Naruto recreate jutsu he'd seen before. Specifically, He had Naruto recreate techniques that Haku had used during their battle on the bridge. So far, he'd managed to teach himself Haku's Sensatsu Susho, something he'd only caught a glimpse of during the fake hunter ninja's skirmish with Sasuke, and how to perform certain jutsu using one-handed seals. Unfortunately, while Hyoten wasn't something that only Haku could use, the Maku Hyoshu was a bloodline limit-related skill. He couldn't replicate it beyond forming the mirrors. That's not to say that training was all Naruto did. He had visited Hinata several times since the preliminaries, more often than not stopping by the Yamanaka shop to buy some flowers for her. He wouldn't admit it to anyone, but he took a secret pleasure in seeing the Hyuga princess blush every time he came in her room with a bouquet in his hands. He'd tried to visit Sasuke once, only to find that the Uchiha prodigy's bed was completely empty, as if no one had ever slept in it. He'd been confused for a second, wondering if maybe Orochimaru had stolen the boy in his sleep, before he'd taken a better look at the scene of the supposed crime. There was no sign of a struggle and no sign of more than one person being involved in his rival's escape. He'd nearly grinned. Sasuke had left on his own. "Alright," Jiraiya called, halting his training as his fingers moved together almost on reflex, "that's enough. I'd say you've got this down pretty well. You've got 5 days until the finals. Take the time to rest." Nodding, Naruto staggered over to the riverbank, collapsing as soon as his feet hit dry land. His breath came out in short pants, his eyelids drooping as the exhaustion set in. Jiraiya chuckled slightly, amused that he'd finally found the boy's limits. "I'll be back in half an hour," he told the kid, kneeling next to the blonde's head. "If you're still lying here then, I'll take you home myself." In a puff of smoke, the man disappeared. Naruto sighed, rolling over onto his back to look up at the bright afternoon sky. He sighed again as his breathing began to even out, his body slowly regenerating the chakra he'd used up during his training. It had been intense, more so than any other training he'd ever done. "You have progressed well," a familiar voice told him, a smooth, reptilian body lying next to his. "You've even finished that project of yours. Most impressive." "I suppose," Naruto sighed again. "I just feel like there's something missing. Like there's something more I need to learn. Something more that can make me stronger." The dragon lifted its head to look at him, a serious gleam in its eyes. "I guess it's time, then." Naruto arched his eyebrow. "What? Time for what? What's it time for?" "You'd best rest up," the dragon evaded his question. "Come back here tomorrow and summon me. I'm going to teach you the technique I promised." Once more, the block of icy dread dropped into his stomach, churning the acid there uncomfortably. Yeah, he was in deep shit. The roar of rushing water pounded against his ears, the river splashing recklessly against the rocks as it headed for the waterfall. The long grass rose over the sides of his sandals, tickling the calloused pads of his toes. The tangy scent of the water stung his nostrils, the smell wafting from the roaring river. He stepped carefully, almost hesitantly, over the hard stones, gathering his wits and courage about him. He was stepping into the situation blind. He didn't know what was going to happen, but his gut feeling told him it wasn't something good. It was supposed to be a new technique, but something felt wrong about it. Slowly, he bit his thumb, wiping the thick blood over his left palm. With a methodical pace, he went through each seal at a snail's pace, making sure it was correct. First boar, then dog, then bird, then monkey, then ram. He thrust his palm down, spider web chains of kanji spreading from the point of contact. There was a large puff of smoke as Naruto felt a bit of vertigo, shooting up into the air. His feet stood atop something hard yet soft and smooth yet scaly, a sea of icy azure invading his vision. He felt his eyes widen to saucers as he realized the truth of the situation. He was standing atop a huge Hyorinmaru, one at least 100 times bigger than the one he knew. "So, you managed," the voice was deeper, but it was still familiar. "I wonder, however, if you can manage the task I have set for you." "Task?" Naruto asked confusedly. "What's this task?" "As you know, by calling out the correct command along with my name, you can merge your power with mine," the dragon told him. "However, there is a level of power beyond that where you and I merge our powers much further. To accomplish this task, you must defeat me and claim my power for your own." "What?" Naruto shouted in alarm. "Defeat you? How?" "Don't worry, child," Hyorinmaru placated, chuckling amusedly, "this is not direct combat. All you must do is defeat one challenge I will set for you." "Challenge?" Naruto asked tentatively, slightly hesitant. He firmed his resolve from rubber to iron. Okay, what's this challenge? You have 4 days left before your finals, the dragon said calmly. To achieve the next level of power, you must stay atop me for the next 72 hours straight. Do you accept this challenge? Of course, Naruto exclaimed, standing shakily. This is only one step on the road to Hokage. If I can accomplish this, I'll be that much closer to my dream. So be it, the dragon said solemnly. With a jerk, Hyorinmaru threw himself to the ground, writhing through the river like giant snake. Naruto let out a yelp as he nearly lost his footing, using chakra to grip tightly to the scales on the beast's back. Water rose up around him, soaking his clothes all the way down to his skin. The dragon jerked again and Naruto gripped its scales with all his strength, desperate not to fall off. His grasp loosened, but he refused to let go. Gravity tugged on him hard, pulling him as hard as it could. Another wave of vertigo filled him. Gah! Naruto cried, his fingers slipping slightly. I should have known better than to do something like this. Hyorinmaru leapt off the ground, sprouting wings that had previously been invisible. Naruto's eyes widened. Oh, shit. Gaara walked quietly into the hospital room of Rock Lee, his bloodshot eyes staring intensely at the bleached white walls in front of him. He strode slowly, purposefully towards the bed containing the bandaged, spandex-wearing boy, his intent clear to anyone and anything capable of independent thought. His open right hand shot outwards as his left jumped upwards, clenching at his head. Sand burst from his gourd, his breathing deep as it crept along the floors with a life of its own. It swirled slowly around Lee's bed, steadily creeping up onto the unconscious boy, attempting to cocoon him in a deadly coffin. Suddenly, without warning, a fist came out of nowhere and collided solidly with his cheek, sending him sprawling backwards into the floor. As the shock of being hit slowly wore off, Gaara straightened up, a small bit of his armor of sand flaking from his murderous face. Naruto stood in front of him, his sword strapped to his back with a green sash. Replacing his jacket and the shirt beneath it was a zip-up, sleeveless, black turtleneck. It blended seamlessly with his new black pants and sandals. His eyes were icy blue and the room temperature seemed to drop, the air around the boy wavering with power. Shikamaru stood not too far off, rubbing his cheek tentatively. Ow. Damn it, Naruto, I feel what he feels, remember? What are you doing? Naruto ignored Shikamaru, a scowl on his face. To release so much killing intent, Shikamaru frowned seriously. Why are you trying to kill Lee-san? Do you have some kind of grudge? No, Gaara said, his voice monotonous. I do not. It's not something that complicated. I'm going to kill him just because I want to. Oh yeah? Said Shikamaru, faking his cocky tone. Well, we're not going to let you do that. I mean, hey, you're strong, but we were holding back in the prelims, too. Right now, 2 against 1, you don't stand a chance. You get in my way and you're dead. Gaara seemed unfazed by Shikamaru's comment, his teal-green eyes shining with hate. I'd like to see you try. Naruto shouted, grasping the azure-clothed hilt of his sword. Naruto, Shikamaru hissed at the blonde. Shut up, this guy's a monster. So, Naruto hissed back, I've got a real monster in me. He's nothing. A real monster, you say? Gaara seemed slightly intrigued. I was born a monster. I came into this world by taking the life of the woman I would have called mother. My father created me in order to be Suna's ultimate weapon. I was spoiled and allowed to do whatever I pleased. But starting around the time when I turned 6, my father tried countless times to assassinate me. Wait, Shikamaru said in consternation. I thought you said you were spoiled. A being too strong can become an existence of fear. Gaara didn't really specify if that was his answer or if he was just continuing his story. Everyone hated me and I found myself wondering why I went on with life. Why, then, do I exist? Why do I live? I could find no answer. But everyone needs a reason to live, or else it's the same as being dead. Finally, I came to this conclusion. I exist to kill everyone but myself. As long as there are people for me to kill, I will not vanish. The hell? Shikamaru was surprised. Now, sand rose, gushing at high speed in the direction of Naruto and his companion. Let me feel alive. The sand suddenly fell to the floor as Gaara made eye contact with the dragon. Only he could see that was hovering over the blonde's shoulder, his face frozen in shock. Gaara doubled over, clenching his head with his hands and screaming, his sand writhing and twisting on the floor, as if in pain. Slowly, The demonic sand ninja walked backward, heading towards the window, his sand following him obediently, as though a pathetic slave to him. His pain seemed to have lessened by the time he reached his goal, since he wasn't doubled over anymore, but he still appeared to be struggling with something. Regardless, he turned before he left, his right eye shut and his breathing labored. "I will kill you guys." The crowd roared in excitement, eager to see the Chunin hopefuls tear into one another. The volume in the arena was deafening and the finals hadn't even started. Several people were making bets and odds continued to change and twist. Many nobles from lands far and wide sat in the stands, patiently awaiting their entertainment. The Hokage sat up in his private box with the cage from the Land of Wind, watching the entire proceedings with a neutral expression on his face. Several guards were stationed around him protectively, each standing at attention with a serious expression. Likewise, the cage had many guards as well, each willing to give his or her life. Shiranui Genma frowned as he looked over the competitors, the senbon between his lips twitching incessantly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the candidates for Chunin had showed up for the finals. Neji, Naruto, Gaara, Kankuro, Shino, Shikamaru, and Temari were all accounted for. The only one missing was Uchiha Sasuke, the supposed star of the show. For the most part, as far as Genma knew, the majority of the examinees hadn't changed at all appearance-wise since the preliminaries. Neji still wore his pale, short-sleeved jacket and black shorts. Gaara looked like he had several sets of that uniform he wore. Kankuro still wore his strange black jumpsuit with the cat-eared hood. Temari had her revealing dress-like thing on, and Shino and Shikamaru might as well have just come from the preliminaries. Except Naruto. Naruto's appearance had changed drastically from his original orange jumpsuit, especially concerning the color. His sword was strapped to his back with a green sash, a bright golden lotus-shaped clasp positioned on it just below his xiphoid process. Replacing his jacket and the shirt beneath it was a zip-up, sleeveless, black turtleneck. It blended seamlessly with his new black pants and sandals. His blonde hair was longer as well. Several strands of sun-kissed yellow fell over top of his hitai, just long enough to cover the majority of the metal plate. The rest was even wilder and spikier than before, seemingly untamable by conventional means. 2 locks of blonde fell on each side of his face right in front of his ears, reaching down to his lobes, if barely. Genma had to hide his shock from the rest of the world, and he had no doubt that many others did too. The boy in front of him, with that serious scowl on his face and his analyzing blue eyes narrowed, looked like the reincarnation of the late 4th Hokage. Kakashi, Genma thought absently, was in for quite the surprise when he got back. "Hey, Mr. Examiner," Genma blinked himself out of his thoughts, looking up to see Naruto's hand raised. "Yeah?" he asked, trying to regain his composure. "What happens if Sasuke's not here in time for his match?" came the question, still with that serious look on his face. "Well," Genma's senbon twitched as he spoke, which Naruto thought was very dangerous. If he's not here by the time his match is scheduled to begin, he'll lose by default and be disqualified. Genma opened a pocket watch, looking at the time as Naruto nodded in understanding. He flipped it closed. "It's time to begin the Chunin selection exam finals. If everyone but Hyuga-san and Uzumaki-san would proceed to the stands, we can begin." The other genin nodded and left, Naruto and Neji the only ones standing in the arena. Genma nodded, "All right." He stepped up between the 2 boys, glancing at each of them for a few seconds. "You guys are up first, so make sure to put on a good show." He made a motion with his hand, "Begin." Neji sneered at the blonde, dropping into the stance of the Hyuga's famous Jukin, "I'll rejoice as I watch you fall to pieces when you discover reality." Naruto scowled, his right hand reaching up to the hilt of his sword. "I'm 10 times stronger than I was during the preliminaries." Neji's upper lip curled, the veins around his eyes bulging as the Byakugan activated. 10 times nothing is still nothing. You were fated to lose the moment I was chosen as your opponent. Up in the stands, Kurenai was thinking, this match will decide the threat level Naruto-san poses to enemy ninja. If he can defeat Neji-san, he might just be able to defeat Shino-kun as well. You say that now, Naruto said, his sword sheath dissolving as he pulled out Hyôrinmaru, dashing for his enemy. Try saying it again after I've beaten you. Neji pulled out a kunai, blocking the strike with it. He was surprised as he struggled to keep up the block, his hand shaking under the pressure. Naruto's expression was serious, his blue eyes glinting icily. The fight's just started and I already have 2 advantages, Naruto told him, bringing his left hand up in a seal. The first is the water vapor in the air. The second is that I've occupied one of your hands, preventing you from using jutsu. Slowly, the water in the air began to condense into several vague forms that slightly resembled Senbon. They formed a sort of cage around him, surrounding him from all sides in a death trap. Calmly, Naruto named his technique, Sensatsu Susho. The water needles rushed in, embedding themselves deeply in his body. Blood oozed and dripped, a small rivulet of it traveling down his chin. He looked up at the blonde in front of him, one eye half-lidded, then vanished in a puff of smoke, replaced by a heavily skewered log. Naruto twisted, bring his left arm up to block near his shoulder. A glowing palm soared past him, mere inches from his face, but Naruto didn't even flinch. The inside of Neji's elbow pressed lightly against his forearm. A smirk curled on Naruto's lips, try again, idiot. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise as 4 glowing fingers sunk into his back painfully, not enough to break the skin but enough to feel as though they had. Foreign chakra flooded his body, threatening to shut down his kidneys. Then, with a splash of liquid, Naruto fell apart into a thick but shallow puddle of water, obviously not the real one. Neji's own eyes went wide as the implications sunk in, forcing him to reevaluate his opponent's abilities. He'd been surprised when the blonde had pulled off a water technique using the vapor in the air, but to have a water clone, which was 1/10 as strong as the original, do so was amazing. And he hadn't even been able to tell it was a water clone either. This brought about many questions. When and where had the blonde learned to use a foreign technique like Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu, and from who? How did he form a Mizu Bunshin using vapor in the air? How did he learn to do something like that and from who? What other foreign jutsu did he know? Neji jumped to the side as a blue dragon soared towards him, its red eyes gleaming. It twisted around to follow him at the last second, but collided with ground, creating a large and long snake-like line of ice. He had seen the boy use this skill in the preliminaries, but that in no way prepared one to have it used on him or her. Above them, the sky darkened with black clouds. That just brought even more questions, questions he should have asked the first time he had seen this beast. How did the blonde boy create a massive water dragon without any water around and then make it freeze on contact with something solid? Where did he learn to do something so complex and complicated with one technique? If it had been taught, who had taught him? Who even knew how to do something like that? This blonde boy should be simple. He was an orphan that had joined the academy to become a ninja. He took the graduation exam 3 times before he passed, and he passed in an unorthodox method. He had no exceptional skills and had passed at the bottom of his class. He was a loser who had just barely graduated from the academy. He should have been easy to beat. The Uzumaki boy, however, was anything but simple and ordinary. He was adept at kenjutsu, even though no one had ever taught him to use a sword. That implied many different things, but it confirmed none of them for sure. He could also do something that only the Nadaime Hokage had been able to do, and he had taken that ability farther as well. That begged a question that many had thought they could answer easily. It raised a query that most hadn't even thought existed, simply because of who the blonde was. Surely, his personality disarmed any opinions that would think of him as powerful. But now, the question was, who is Uzumaki Naruto? The blonde reappeared behind the large wall of ice, already going through hand seals. He stopped at Tiger, pursing his lips as he raised his fingers to them. He blew and Neji could immediately place a name to the jutsu, Kaden, Gukaku no Jutsu. A giant fireball was released, roaring towards Neji and easily 3 times the size of any other that the Hyuga prodigy had seen. It soared toward him and Neji could do nothing but watch as it came closer. Its form seemed to grow as it came nearer, and the brunette half expected his life to flash before his eyes. The fireball stopped short, colliding with the wall of ice. It pushed roughly for several seconds, before fizzing out into nothing. Neji was tempted to palm his face at the stupidity of the blonde, wondering himself why he'd thought the kid had any ability. That is, until the complexity of his opponent's plan was revealed. The ice had melted but not evaporated, lying on the arena floor like a large puddle. The blonde went through more hand seals, which numbered somewhere in the dozens, before stopping on Bird. The water on the ground churned and swirled, twisting into a terrible beast as Naruto called out the name of his jutsu, Sôten no Jutsu. A giant dragon of water roared to life, twisting upwards from the puddle the blonde had just made. It locked its menacing gaze on him, baring its liquid fangs in a twisted and evil snarl as it leered at him. With a jerk of movement, it rushed for him in a torrent of water. Water that Neji had no doubt was boiling hot and painful. "Tch," he scoffed, gathering chakra around himself. "I guess it has come to this." He spun on his heel, creating a twister of himself. A dome of chakra formed around him, swirling to the time of his own spin, following his movements. The dragon crashed down on it, trying to break in to attack him. It splashed around his shield, splattering into nothing as his defense broke its form into nothing. As both the dragon and his dome disappeared, a crater was left behind with Neji in the center, calmly declaring, "Kaden." "Hado no Sanjusen," the blonde's voice called, prompting Neji to look up. His opponent was gathering a large amount of energy in his palm, pointing at him, Sokatsui. A burst of energy came at him faster than Neji could think to block, throwing his arms up in a makeshift defense. The blast collided with the ground in front of him, kicking up a cloud that would easily obscure anyone's vision. Neji nearly smirked as he caught onto the blonde's plan. "That won't work," he called, scanning the arena. "My eyes are able to see through even the densest of fogs. This cheap parlor trick doesn't give you any advantage." Neji received no answer, so he continued, hoping to irk his opponent, "You should have targeted me with that blast. You'll regret not doing so. After all, you only get one miracle per battle and you just used yours up." "You like to talk a lot, don't you?" a familiar voice asked from behind him. Neji turned around, barely dodging a stab aimed at his head. A shallow cut carved itself into his cheek, bleeding sluggishly. He jumped back, Naruto not moving at all. "But how?" Neji asked, dumbfounded. "How did you get behind me without you seeing me?" Naruto finished for him. He smirked in a vulpine manner. "That first attack was merely a distraction to grab your attention. While you were busy blocking it and seeing through my trick, you failed to realize that I had fired a second attack at the ground the second the dust cloud had formed." Neji's eyes went wide as Naruto continued, "That second attack was used to dig a hole for myself. From there, I had my shadow clones dig a tunnel until I was right beneath you. After that, I dug myself out and attacked you from behind faster than you would see me. It's called Shunpo." Now, the boy in front of him puffed away into smoke, leaving nothing behind as the voice of another Naruto called over to him, "What was that about one miracle per battle?" Another dragon rushed toward Neji, who knew he couldn't dodge in time to avoid the brunt of the attack. He spun on his heel once more, turning himself into a twister of motion. He threw chakra from his entire body, watching as it spread out to create a large, impenetrable fortress. The dome spread, defending him from the attack. The dragon crashed against his defense, splashing around the dome as it was torn to pieces by Neji's chakra shield. What was different about this time, however, was that the dragon didn't just fall apart into water. No, its entirety spread around the dome of energy, freezing in place as it was blocked by the Hyuga's Kaden. Eventually, a dome of thick ice, trapping the boy inside of it, replaced the dome of chakra. "Now," Naruto called, going through hand seals. The dome melted as he stopped, turning into thousands of water needles, Sensatsu Susho no Daikimusho. "Shit," Neji swore, spinning again as he gathered more chakra desperately. "Kaden." With his last-second defense, Neji managed to block the needles and prevent his demise, escaping from the attack without a scratch. As he tried to regain his breath, however, a blur flitted in front of his eyes, landing next to him with its back turned. A cold sensation ran down his spine as his hands snapped together in front of him. "So, Neji," Naruto started lowly, "if I only get one miracle per battle, what's this?" Neji looked down, still panting as his eyes widened to saucers. A chain tied his arms together at the wrists, too tight for him to do hand seals. They were also encased from the fingertips up to his elbows in ice, restricting his movements severely. He was also out of chakra. He'd lost. "You're out of chakra, Neji," Naruto said, looking at him out of the corner of his eye. "Do you give up?" Neji sighed. "Mr. Examiner," he called, the veins around his eyes receding, "I must forfeit." "Winner," Genma called as the ice around Neji's hands melted, the chain retracting into Hyorinmaru's hilt, Uzumaki Naruto. The arena was silent for a moment, as though they had trouble believing the outcome of the spectacular battle. Naruto shifted uncomfortably under their gaze, waiting hesitantly for their reaction. Then, He heard a noise he hadn't thought he'd hear from a crowd of Konoha villagers and shinobi. It started out low and soft, as though the crowd didn't know how to react to his victory, then it grew. It grew louder and louder as more people joined in, some standing to make themselves known. The cheer rose in volume steadily, growing and growing until it became a deafening roar. They cheered for him. Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, grinning broadly like an idiot. His eyes searched the crowd, looking at each and every person calling out excitedly, until he found one particular person that made his heart soar. There, in the crowd, sitting next to her teammate Kiba, was Hyuga Hinata. Her eyes were shining with pride and excitement as she smiled down at him warmly. That, Naruto thought, made all of it worth it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. The next part will be out soon.